Hello everyone. We have another discussion video today. This one we'll be talking about CTFs, mostly at the meta level. We won't be talking about a specific CTF unless we touch on one tangentially. To clarify, we'll also be focusing on the more popular Jeopardy-style timed CTFs, like the 48-hour ones that run on weekends, for example. So we're not going to be talking about the attack-defense style finals of a lot of CTFs. And we're not going to be talking about like the small CTFs that aren't really played by some of the bigger teams.
Well, not played, and also just there's a lot of there are a lot of CTFs out there. So as we're talking about a lot of things and a lot of consistency issues, going to be the ones that we can kind of hold to a bit of a higher standard, rather than just like your random like sunflower CTF or something.
Yeah. So I'll also state, just to be clear, and say where like my points will be based off of. I haven't been competitively into CTFs or played them much in the last year or two. I've played a few challenges here and there and read some write-ups. I've also done a bit of challenge design, but I haven't played competitively in a while. I think the last one I tried to play somewhat competitively was Encrypt CTF back in 2019, and I wasn't in like a top team or anything. That was just me solo. So yeah, I can't really offer the perspective of being in like a big team and playing a CTF every like second week or whatever. But there is a reason for like why I'm not competitively as interested in CTFs anymore, which we'll get into. So yeah, Z, I'll let you talk about your experience here too.
Yeah, and I can say also, like, I have not played with a top team. I've been around with CTFs for a while. Want to say first time was maybe in 2009. Played reasonably seriously, pretty frequently over the years until around 2015 or 2016. I've played with a number of different teams. Done challenge design pretty much since, I think it was like my second or so year playing. Started doing some. So I have a bit of a background. I've taken it somewhat seriously, but never like on a top team. So I don't have that perspective either. That said, I have pushed CTFs as a learning resource for many years. I've been invested in it.
Yeah, I think you have more of a CTF background than I do. So yeah, with that out of the way, first I think we'll talk about some of the benefits of CTF and why they've kind of exploded in popularity and why you've been pushing them in our learning focused discussions and on the podcast. So I think the big one is learning. That's probably the top one. It's a way to CTFs are a great way to be able to learn some concepts without having to jump into like some modern monolithic target. You can get like the bite-sized challenges to push across a concept.
Yeah, it's kind of like you can get experience practicing the real world skills, but not necessarily having the complete real world experience that goes along with that. Everything, as you just mentioned, is kind of bite-sized.
Yeah, and I think because of that, not only is it easier to be able to learn those concepts, but it also the motivation is something that I think you have a strong opinion of. That I like the motivation is a lot easier to acquire to do like the CTF type challenges as opposed to I don't know, becoming a Chrome 0-day researcher or something.
Yeah, I mean,
So
because you have kind of an end in sight, it's like you're dedicating a weekend, say, to a CTF. You're dedicating it. That's the time frame. You're just going to do what you can in that time and then drop it. It's okay. It's whatever you didn't get done, you didn't get done. You didn't have the time for it. There's not kind of this endless struggle. So motivation, I think, is a bit easier when the end is actually in sight. And I mean, it's gamified. That always motivates people in general. Just you've got an actual goal, you've got points, you've got something, I'll say tangible. Technically it's not, but you've got something there that you can see as like your indicator of progress.
leaderboards are a great motivator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, frustration sucks, but it's part of it. And so you're kind of getting that frustrating experience. It's just part of own research, but in a measured way. And I think that helps.
And of course, the other thing that's worth mentioning too is the fact that you get that closure. I think that was kind of implied with what you were saying, but I just wanted to highlight it because if you're doing like 0-day research on a target, you'll never know about the vulnerabilities that you missed, or if you just think that a vulnerability was unexploitable when it was, you may never even know that it was exploitable or how that could have been done. Whereas with a CTF, if you miss a challenge, then you will be able to go back after and see, okay, how did other people solve it? Let me go look at the write-ups. You don't really have that in real world research,
Yeah,
and that is a very valuable aspect.
on kind of a similar note, it's like, you know, it's vulnerable. So, like, you'll usually have some hint as to where you need to go with it. You'll know, like, maybe we'll go down wrong paths, definitely happens. But, like, you know there's a vulnerability there, so you can really kind of narrow in and focus in on doing that research. That when you are dealing with a live target, you don't know if there's a vulnerability where you're looking, or if you're working on a strategy in the actual exploit dev part of it. You don't know if your strategy is going to work out until you dig a little bit further. Whereas in a CTF and like a toy binary, you don't have very many options. It's usually coercing you into just a handful of different paths for your actual exploit strategy, which is one of the issues actually with the CTFs in terms of the skills that it's teaching. But that's besides the point, I suppose.
Yeah. So the other like major benefit of CTF is the community aspect and the networking. Um, I don't know about you, Z, but I have met some people through CTS, a little bit on like IRC when I had to try to ask for like a hint or to ask, is this an intended problem in the challenge or whatever. But yeah, I mean, you do kind of meet people when you're doing it and potentially collaborate and meet with other teams. And if you don't have any other avenue to network with, especially for like if you want to get into like a job or something like that, then I feel like the CTF space is really good for that too. There's a lot of people that work at some of the bigger companies or just have like a good deal of experience in the industry who do CTFs and are in some of those teams.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
like being able to lean on that knowledge is very useful.
it's great for networking. It's great just for getting some exposure with other people too. If you get onto a decently sized team or a decently skilled team, just being around the people, being part of the discussion on how do we break this, like, you learn a lot just through the exposure with other people who are doing the work also. And I mean, there's that mutual suffering too. Um, being on voice calls with people all night, or being in person for some CTFs. I don't know how many you've played in person, but there's that mutual suffering that just kind of forges a certain type of friendship, I think, when everybody's sleep deprived and you're just going at whatever challenge.
And then someone finally cracks it. Yeah.
Or not. And then
Yeah.
someone finally cracks.
That too. So yeah, I mean, we just kind of talked about CTS and a lot of the benefits around it. That said, I think this is kind of the turning point in the discussion where it might get a little bit, it might tip towards the other side of the scale, and that's when we talk about challenge design. So I kind of wanted to talk about the past versus what current challenge design looks like in terms of the meta, and possibly like where the future of it will go. Um, so I personally, I do see kind of a worrying trend with the design of challenges. It feels like a lot of the challenges and the CTS we've seen lately, as recently as DEF CON Quals that just happened this week as of recording, um, it feels like there are a lot of challenges that are designed strictly just to be hard, not to be like interesting or to teach a concept across. It's just kind of like, here, we're just going to throw a bunch of stuff at you, get through all the layers, and then you get the flag. I do feel like that's happening more and more in some of the larger CTFs, and that's why personally I've been backing out and not really. I haven't really had much interest in them in the last like year or two. But yeah, I just wanted this. I was curious on your thoughts, Z. I think you're maybe a little bit more optimistic than me, or a
Well,
little bit more.
I mean, I agree with you. There has been a bit of a trend in some CTFs where, in order to make a challenge that is difficult enough to actually hold back some of the top teams, and that is a very real challenge, because some of the top teams are very good, especially when they've got the numbers plus they're very good. Of just of adding certain layers to the challenge that are like, this makes it harder. Doesn't make it more interesting. It's not intellectually satisfying to actually complete. but the extra layer makes it more difficult. That's a worrying trend, but there's another trend that's been there, and that is I've seen more web, more kind of miscellaneous challenges. Actually, I'll say web specifically. From when I started to now, there have been a lot more really solid web challenges that are also worth a good number of points. Not really seeing it with DEF CON, not seeing it with some CTFs, but Plaid, Google, CTF, they'll have some of the web challenges there, and that has been a positive trend. And I do think seeing something more interesting application security vulnerabilities is a positive trend. And oh no, because back when I started, it was just like web shit. Nobody really cared about it. They were just the easy challenges. So I appreciate seeing like some thought being put into web challenges now. So that is a good thing. But like you said, on the flip side, and even you see it with some of the web challenges too. Like one from DEF CON Quals ended up being largely just a JavaScript obfuscation thing, which can be an interesting challenge, but the obfuscation was pretty standard. It was just different enough that like your standard tools wouldn't automatically break it, but otherwise pretty standard. Like in that case, it's like beating the obfuscation wasn't that interesting. It didn't make the challenge very good. It just added an extra little tedious step into what you had to do, and it's adding in those tedious steps that I think has to be done very carefully. Honestly, one of my favorite challenges to talk about is an insanely tedious challenge where there was a like several pages printed out on like this tractor fed paper, so like the paper that's all connected, of base 64 printed out on that you had to OCR in order to read the bitmap, like the image that was base 64. Insanely tedious to actually do that, or to type it out if you didn't OCR it. But in the context of the CTF that year, this was open CTF in like 2015 or 2014 or something. Kind of a fun challenge, really annoying. I wasn't the one who solved it, to be clear. Really annoying for the guy who did it. But like it fit the theme of that year's challenge, and I think that's kind of important. It fit the rest of the theme. Like there's a reason for it. It wasn't just a tedious challenge, but like there's a reason behind it. And that's kind of what's missing, I think, with a lot of challenges that just add layers. Like you can do it. You could have those layers to a challenge. I just think when you're designing a challenge, it needs to make sense in some way beyond just it's difficult. Otherwise, that really tedious challenge just becomes annoying rather than fun or enjoyable.
So I think it really boils down to two issues that build off each other. One is like a scalability issue. It's really hard to like you were saying. It's really hard to design the challenges for these large and experienced teams. They're just going to stomp all the other teams, even if you make the challenges really difficult. And that's basically an unsolvable problem. The other problem that's built off of that is to compensate for that, the CTF organizers try to make these really difficult challenges with just not a lot of, just for the sake of being difficult, really. So I was trying to think of some of the ways that you can maybe try to improve that. One way I was thinking of was maybe moving away from the 48-hour cram CTFs on the weekends and maybe trying to do longer CTFs. That way it's not so heavily in favor of the big teams, but you can still have the harder challenges without making people feel like they're overburdened with such a short time window.
It kind of
That
is,
said,
though.
there is problems with that too.
It kind of is favoring the larger teams, or specifically the larger teams or teams of those who don't need to work. A weekend, most people can kind of get off. Even if they work weekends, they can probably get a weekend off for a CTF. Maybe they don't care about it that much and won't do it, but a weekend is a very reasonable commitment of time. A week-long CTF is just a bit much, especially for anybody that's working. They're not going to be able to dedicate the same time other teams will be. So it's going to come down to what team can actually like take a week off from work or isn't working.
That's the big problem with it. So, like, yeah, that was kind of my first thought, but it quickly kind of fell apart when I talked about it with some people and thought about it more. I was just curious if you had maybe any ideas like that of how in the future The
like how you
issues
can
could be
approach
mitigated.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the biggest thing that can be done on that, and this isn't really an answer, is just more difficult challenges that aren't tedious, more subtle bugs, perhaps. I don't know. It's a good question. Um, yeah, I don't really have an answer on how you solve that in terms of, because I guess you've got, if you're only designing the CTF for the top teams, you can pretty easily actually just make like some subtle bugs, some hard challenges that are just for them. But then that also kind of leaves out everybody else that plays the CTF who maybe isn't playing to win, but is playing to learn something or do something.
I guess the best way around that is just to, and this is kind of already happening, is just to have like separate CTFs for separate audiences, right? Like a DEF CON CTF, and I kind of fall back to that point we said on the most recent podcast. It's like not every CTF has to be everything to everybody. DEF CON CTF is not a CTF for like learning, right? It's more for that competitive. It's a qualifier. It has to be hard.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just a matter of trying to direct people into the types of CTFs that are most suitable to them. I think that's probably where there should be some improvements, because right now it's literally just like a bunch of CTFs on CTF time. If you're new to the space, you're not really going to know what the difference is between them. Um, if there was more guidance, I guess, towards trying to direct people to the types of CTFs that are more oriented to them, I think that would be a big benefit. Um, so yeah, I guess that's probably the best way to approach it.
Yeah,
Um,
we just need leagues for the CTFs. You know, work
CTF
your way
leagues.
out of one league into the next and kind of work up like that. I don't think that's actually a solution, to be clear. It was just the idea that came up.
Double A CTFs.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think it just comes down to good challenge side. And part of the problem there is with these top teams, yeah, as we said earlier, it's hard to design challenges because, like, most known common exploit strategies, like, they're already going to be able to solve pretty quickly. So you've got to start jumping into that realm of more artificial ideas. And artificial issues, which are difficult enough for those teams of maybe aren't grounded very well in something you'd actually encounter in real life. And that's then where, like, on the learning side, you're not going to be able to apply the strategies that you're getting from that maybe into a real exploit. So then that kind of takes away some of the benefit there for CTFs.
Yeah, I mean, a supporting point I'll add on that is the competitive teams in CTF literally have like templates set up or like scripts that'll try to automatically solve challenges, because the well has kind of ran dry, I think, on the types of CTF challenges that you can design. After so many years, it's kind of hard to do something new. You kind of just retread some of the same ground that's already been tread. So if you build up a toolkit that solves some of those challenges, it's kind of easy to cheese the newer CTF challenges, and that is what like the top tier CTF has become from what I've observed. Obviously, like I said, I haven't participated in it, but it is a lot of like trying to like do unintended solutions for a target or just run a script that brute forces the answer. Like it's just
I don't
there
know
has
about
been more
brute
of a
force,
cheese meta,
but
I think.
yeah, there is more on that side of automating a lot of the process. It's not necessarily automation from like the start to the finish. It's not like a necessarily full exploit generation, because that is even more difficult. But still, human in the loop assists there that automate a lot of the process, but not necessarily everything.
So I think what I enjoy the most with CTF is I'm starting to care less and less about the timed CTFs that are like 48 hours, and just I think I care more about the longer running ones, like Pwnable KR or something like that. Like I think those CTF challenges are a lot better, especially for people who don't do CTFs a lot or aren't interested in being super competitive. I think those are better options than going for the timed CTFs, because the challenge design is just a lot better, from what I've looked at and the sites that I've
Yeah,
checked
I
out
mean,
in that area.
back when I first started playing CTFs, like those long running websites, that was barely a thing. Like, I mean, there was hack this site, hellbound hackers, and like various little sites kind of copying there for the website of things. um Over the Wire or Smashing the Stack, I think might have been around then too. But
Yeah, that
beyond
one's
that,
pretty
like
old.
there weren't a ton, and now there are. There are like more than I can name. You know, WeChal has like I don't know how many, but probably hundreds listed on their site. Like there's so many options for finding those long running challenges now that didn't exist. I think when the common advice of go, you know, play CTFs to learn, you know, like you go, oh, what's the DEF CON talk? The Making of Atlas. You know, talking about CTFs and using that as your learning avenue. That was the option then. Now these long running CTFs, I think, are the better learning option than the competitive CTFs. Not that like part of the game is just having motivation. So if you want to do the 48 hours, by all means, go and play them and like do those timed competitive CTFs. But I think on like a practical efficiency side, long running CTFs now are a better option.
And that's where I'd put my summary too. Is like if you want to be really competitive and go for like the prizes or just the the clout that comes with doing the time CTFs, then go for it. But if you're more just interested in doing challenges to learn, the longer running ones like Pwnable TW and Pwnable KR are much better options.
Yeah, although with those, like you're less likely to find a team and kind of have that networking aspect.
That
And
is
I
true.
mean, there's definitely something to be said about just being on even like a hack the box team that just like plays regularly, or plays the time CTFs regular, even if it's not super competitive, just being again that exposure to other people, other thought process, see what they're doing. You know, there's something to be said about that too. But yeah, on a whole, I'd kind of push people more towards the longer term ones. But I mean, I'm still probably going to play like, you know, DEF CON CTF most years and stuff.
And I will quickly mention, like with the hack the box stuff, there is some cool community stuff with like people who do streams doing that as well. We've rated a few at certain points in time and been rated by a few. So yeah, I mean the there is still that community aspect. It's just maybe a little bit different, and there are some other avenues you could explore there too. But yeah, I think we will wrap it up there. We've been going pretty long already, so we'll cut it off. Thank you to everyone who tuned in though, and we'll see you on the next discussion video.